Hey guys, MoiDawg here, and today I'm happy to announce a brand new update to Squad, V2.15. With this patch, we have a bunch of new content added to the game, including the long-awaited Australian Defence Forces as the next playable faction, a complete overhaul of FOB emplacements, new weapon and gameplay changes, and much more. What I thought was going to be a simple faction update actually has a lot of things that I didn't realize I wanted, but after playing with everything on the test branch and now as part of the real game, I really can't believe we didn't get some of these things sooner. Seriously, this is a really fun update. But before we get into that, I do want to remind everyone that I stream a lot of Squad on Twitch at twitch.tv/MoiDawg. The live streams are a lot of fun, they're every weekday, and I absolutely love hanging out with you guys, so I hope to see you there. And if you're looking to pick up Squad or other tactical shooters, do check out my official game store at MoiDawg.gg, where your purchase supports me directly. But that's enough of that, let's get into the good stuff. Probably the most exciting thing to come out of Squad V2.15 is of course the Aussies. This faction has been slated to be a part of the game for now nearly 2 years after the original Aussie mod was purchased by OWI. Better late than never, I guess? Well, we're finally getting it, and I've got to say the faction itself looks great. Player models have the Aussie AMCU camo on their uniforms with a variety of gear depending on their kit, and all come equipped with the EF88, essentially the Australian Steyr bullpup rifle. Although a bunch of y'all have reached out to say that in the real world, the Aussies really only use Spectres on their rifles instead of iron sights or any other optics, but for balance purposes, you'll see this weapon with either iron sights, the L-can for some non-magnified optics, as well as the Spectre 4x optic for long range. With quite a lot of NATO weaponry, you would think that the faction would play like a carbon copy of the British or maybe the Canadians. But to be honest, I really think that the vehicles like the PMV, ASLAV 25, and MRH 90 helicopter, plus the unique weapons like the EF88 and even the HK 417 marksman rifle, the Aussies really do have a unique playstyle, especially when you take into consideration that unlike every other faction in game, the Aussie combat engineer roles are split, with one kit allowing for repairing vehicles, building emplacements, and deploying mines, while the other one is essentially a rifleman with Comp B explosive. If you want to know every little thing about the Aussies, I do have a complete faction overview video that I'll link in the top right, which goes through every weapon, every vehicle, and every single kit in detail, so do check that out for the specifics on the faction. Oh, and it is important to mention that nearly 50 layers have been added to the game that include the Aussies, with 15 layers on Anvil and Lashkar Valley, the two maps that were originally part of the Aussie mod and released over the past year and a half. As exciting as a brand new faction is, a surprise addition to the game is a complete rework on FOB deployables. Conventional factions will now be able to place the Hesco Observation Tower, an enormous fortified tower covered in razor wire and camo netting. It costs a whopping 600 build and is limited to 4 per FOB. And as a quick addition, actually all Hesco walls are topped with the same type of razor wire, greatly improving their functionality as defensive structures. Running into these deployables in game are actually now quite intimidating, since these observation towers make you second guess simply charging into the area due to the camo netting up top, which actually looks like camouflage on the outside, but is transparent on the inside, allowing for players to climb up inside of the bunker and have complete visibility of the area while staying concealed. This camouflage netting can be seen on other deployables too, like HMG bunkers, regular Hesco bunkers, pillbox sandbags, indirect fire shelters, and HABs. These one-way nets should encourage more players to use these bunkers, as they will now not only conceal any movement inside, but even reduce the new brighter muzzle flashes that were added in V2.12. For sandbag walls, by adding the netting, you can actually now sneak in firing ports that are practically invisible to enemies approaching, and netting on HABs will also easily prevent spawn camping. For a regular militia, instead of the large outpost, they'll actually be receiving a much smaller watchtower, which is limited to 4 per FOB and costs only 300 build. Now you also might notice that HABs actually all come equipped with lighting inside, as a common complaint since the new lighting update was that it was nearly impossible to see when you spawned in. And an even better quality of life is that when you place a HAB, squad leaders can now see if the exits are blocked or not, including even if the exit is going to be slightly blocked and could slow down player movement, which should help prevent awkward HAB placement, which covers up multiple ways out. Although these changes alone would make FOBs much better than they have been in the past, deployables will now also utilize smart, terrain-dependent camo as well. If you've ever played the US in a map like Gorodok, bright tan HABs and Hesco stand out like a sore thumb. But in 2.15, HABs, HESCO structures, sandbags, and even repair stations utilize what the devs are calling biome-specific camouflage, and all conventional factions will be able to build FOBs that actually blend into the environment around them. The deployables themselves will either select forest, desert, snow as a base, and if camo netting is included, the camo will also replicate the surroundings as well. This may not seem that powerful if you just plop a FOB down in the middle of an open field like this, but build in a forest and you can really see the changes immediately. It's a really fun and cool looking change that I honestly didn't think I needed. And while most of the time these fortifications are still very obvious, in certain areas your FOB can almost disappear into the background. And when you consider that commanders often use UAVs to spot, it's going to make it a lot harder to deal with FOBs as a whole. Overall, all of these tweaks should make base building and FOBs seem less of an afterthought, but one other change that should definitely not go unnoticed is that sandbag walls, HESCOs, bunkers, HABs, and even Razer wire are all now much more resilient to explosive damage, including tank heat rounds, HE mortars, airstrikes, and even artillery. Although bases will still take quite a beating, they should no longer get insta-deleted the moment someone calls in an airstrike, as they have in the past. Squad still moves extremely fast, and most of the time large FOBs are really not viable. But on game modes like Invasion, where a large, imposing base would be helpful to lock down a point, simply waiting for command to drop artillery and then push should no longer mean an instant win for the attacking team, which I think is a fantastic change. And although we didn't really talk about the insurgents, they are actually also getting some FOB love as well. Since their structures are all extremely basic, like barrel walls and sandbags, there's not much camo netting at all. However, I would like to point out that the insurgent HAB now gets tactical laundry, shall we call it? Which is a hilarious and thematically accurate way to cover up the openings, but the faction is also receiving tire fires. Yes, tire fires. These new deployables are insurgent exclusive, and at the moment are limited to 2 per FOB and cost 100 build. From the devs themselves, the design intention for tire fires are to slow down vehicles, cut off enemy routes, conceal friendly travel routes, block sight lines, and create fear and chaos among the enemy. Not only do you get the fire, but the smoke is what is really impressive with these things. And you should be happy to know that I haven't seen any poor performance from these either. Although there is a damage radius for the fire, which kind of acts like a more intense barbed wire effect, damaging and slowing the player, I really would like to see a much larger area of effect. This is a giant, intense, hot fire, and I really don't think you should be able to sneak along the edges to get around it. Either way, that's a really minor complaint, and I do think this is a great immersive deployable for the insurgents as a whole. Right now, you can only use these deployables on a few layers, primarily on Al-Basra, Anvil, Sumari, and Mutaha. But the way I'm reading the patch notes is that if the devs don't see any issues with them now that they can get some good feedback from everyone in game, we should be able to see tire fires on every layer insurgents are on in the future. Moving on from the FOB updates, there are also a few gameplay updates as well, with the first being the rework of flag capture rates. In V2.14, capture rate scaling was added to the game, which allowed for teams to cap flags quicker the more people they had on point. Whereas you would still cap a flag in 2 minutes if you only had 3 people on the objective, increasing that number to 8 would reduce the cap time down to 80 seconds. A really nice change that encouraged squads to play together on both offense and defense. In 2.15, this scaling has been adjusted even further, with the most notable change being the increased time to the base capture rate for AAS and RAS flags. Now, if you only have a 1-player advantage over the enemy team in the area, it will take 220 seconds or nearly 4 minutes to capture an objective. But that can be reduced all the way down to 100 seconds if you get 8 or more players on the point. This is a much more dramatic scaling change, and I see 2 potential results of this, with the first being that players will now be inclined to backcap objectives with full squads, which should also negate the typical AS first or second cap rush, since now you're less likely to run into one person capping it, but instead an entire squad capping it, and defensive squads are going to be that much more important to holding on to these objectives. It might be wishful thinking, but this capture change plus a buff to FOB structures might actually lead to more defensive gameplay, which should make for better games all around in general. Finally, to help with this new mechanic, there is also a new capture rate indicator included in the flag status at the top right of your screen, which will show just how fast the objective is being capped. A really nice change that can give you a good visual on not just the cap rate itself, but an idea of how many enemies are also on point as well. There have also been a whole host of bug fixes and gameplay tweaks, such as the improved turret traverse speeds using your keyboard and mouse, making it easier to move and acquire targets, as well as 2 great helicopter quality of life changes, with the Russian and MEA hips now having 900 ammo and 600 construction as default starting loadouts, an extremely welcome change from the 750 that almost all squad leaders would have to change at the start of the game, and pilots now no longer receive massive TK penalties if their chopper crashes with a full squad in it. Most of the time, if a pilot's helicopter wasn't actually destroyed by something like an ATGM or a tank round, the vehicle would lose engine power or rotor control and eventually crash, killing everyone inside and counting each and every one of those deaths as a team kill for the pilot, resulting in nearly 10-minute spawn penalties. This was extremely harsh, and it really punished pilots. And thankfully, it has been changed so that the pilot will now only receive an additional 60-second timer, or essentially a suicide penalty, on their timer if they are killed. Additionally, infantry players will also be happy to learn that both the 1P29 inverted optic and the British SUSATs have all been fixed to allow for ranging, with the 1P29 ranging up to 400 meters and the SUSAT up to 600 meters, both in 100-meter increments. And for all the weapons, you now have a brand new depth of field effect. Although you can notice it simply while holding your weapon, it's most noticeable while ADSing. If you're not a fan of this effect, simply change your post-processing to low and it will remove it completely. And the one last notable change is that Canada no longer has an A10 for their command call-in, but will instead use the CF-18 Hornet, which is essentially the Canadian variant of the FA-18. And just like the Aussies, the CF-18 is basically a Sioux strike. But it is really nice to get some faction-specific aircraft instead of everything just simply being an A10. Now, if you'd like to see the entire bug and feature list, I have linked the complete patch notes in the description below, so do feel free to check them out since a lot of the visual and audio problems we've had in the past have actually been addressed, which is great to see. But that just about wraps everything in Squad V2.15. Overall, as happy as I am to finally play the Aussies, the new FOB changes and capture mechanics are really what I'm interested in to seeing how they affect the real games. But what do you guys think? Will we see more FOBs? Will players actually backcap? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. But that's it for me. Until next time, peace.